Light 'em if you got 'em. Time to torch down the house, y'all. You're listening to the Shannabis cast. Like us on Facebook at Shannabis TV. Follow us on Instagram at Shannabis Cannabis. Watch us on YouTube, Shannabis Cannabis, or listen to us on Podbean. Today we are here with Dean Matt. Thank you for joining us,
How you doing,
Dean.
Shanna?
I am well. So let me just tell the audience, thank you all that are tuning in right now and listening. Hi. So Dean Matt is an experienced chief financial officer. His recent experience in the cannabis industry includes increasing value of a multi-state operator, 10 times leading to the largest exit sale transaction in history of the US cannabis industry, which was $850 million. He has executed over $3 billion of liquidity events and or debit equity raises, including venture, PE, IPO, joint ventures, etc. Hypergrowth startups to Fortune 100s. Thank you for joining us, Dean Matt.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell our audience more about yourself that we can't read on the internet, or things that you can share?
Well, a couple things. About a year and a half ago, I was happily retired, and then the phone rang. And my background by trade has been CFO of many different companies in different industries, different structures. And my wife and I, we have a plane. We like flying around and golfing, and thought we would give it I thought I would want to learn more about this company. It was a cannabis company. So now I'm intrigued, right? Cannabis, this is August or July of 2018. I knew nothing about the industry, but I've known nothing about a lot of the other industries. And I was intrigued. So got to meet this group, and fast forward in just 8 short months, we ended up selling the company for $850 million. It was the largest transaction in U.S. cannabis history at the time. After that sale, I was doing a lot of work out in Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona in the cannabis industry with a dozen other companies. This is all through 2019, and had a lot of long plane rides. So I thought I might as well write a book, and that's what I ended up doing. And the book just got published. Actually, it's coming out on Amazon May 1st. You could download it off of Kindle today.
Gone to Pot. I love the title, Gone to Pot. It actually feels like it refers to a lot of the content that I've been putting out there, a lot of the information I've been putting out there. Actually, it verifies a lot of things in my little world. But let me ask you, Gone to Pot, what give us some content for what's in there. What can we expect when we read it?
So, by way of background, I've worked for some pretty, what I'd call world-class entrepreneurs. So, for instance, Wayne Huizinga started Waste Management. He then went on to do Blockbuster Video, AutoNation USA, Extended Stay America, Republic Waste. He owned all the Florida professional sports teams at one time or another, Hard Rock Stadium. He died a year and a half ago. But his companies have been very acquisitive. Wall Street always threw money at him because he earned his keep. He had credibility. Another guy I worked for that we ended up taking a company public out in New York in the 90s. This guy's name is Brad Jacobs. Brad is likewise a world-class entrepreneur. Brad and I took United Waste public, ended up selling the company for $2 billion. Brad went on to start up XPO Logistics. I'm sorry, he went on to start up United Rentals, the biggest equipment rental company in the world. And most recently, he's the CEO of XPO Logistics, and he built that thing from about a $40 million company to $16 billion. So these are my reference points. These are the people that I look at as world-class entrepreneurs. Now, jumping into the cannabis industry, you don't find any Brad Jacobs or or Wayne Heising is in the waste in the cannabis industry. A lot of hardworking guys. They fill out applications. They may have been donut shop owners or car or dry cleaner owners. They may have been in
Lawyers.
a lot of lawyers in the business for sure. Some by necessity, and some just because of dumb luck or maybe even bad luck. But these are the people that operate the C-suites in the cannabis industry. And quite honestly, I'm not that impressed. And based on the stock um, the stock performance over the last year, I don't think anybody else should be as well. Now, again, they're hardworking people. They've put one foot in front of the other, but it's quite a different level of skill set between owning a restaurant, let's say, and a multi-state operator. So what's going on in the industry right now is what I write about in the book. We're seeing a lot of these C-suite guys get pushed aside. We're seeing a lot of deals, blockbuster deals, not get done. We're seeing my book tells a lot of stories about greed intersecting with inexperience, and I've been in these kind of roll-ups before or land grabs, and it's kind of a natural maturation process of the industry. The guys that take these companies to the table to get investment money, look, it's kind of what the internet was. uh, a lot of hype, a lot of wild west. Investors buy into that, throw tons of money at it, and then there's kind of a pullback, and that's what we're seeing right now in the cannabis industry.
What is your take on the inexperience and overcompensation and some of the process involved in the structure of these very large global companies that are providing products that they can't even commerce across state line?
Well, everyone's hoping for, the legalization of cannabis, but even before that, I think they just oversold the expectations of the industry. And if you look at each of these companies, a lot of the ones I've been involved with, especially, but it's endemic across the whole industry. There's an underinvestment in the back office. So when people are looking for projections, they're looking for fine. I mean, I was involved in an acquisition, two acquisitions, and both of the people that were doing the due diligence on this company I was with. Um, the first question they ask is, "Hey, let's see your projections for the next year." And in very short order, I told them we don't have any. I mean, you can't run a multi-state cannabis company with 3 people in the accounting department. It just doesn't work. And that's a lesson that these inexperienced C-suite executives are understanding.
Do you find that that's a big part of talent, because especially in an industry where you don't have projections yet, you don't have a small business owner, you can't really go to the big boys and ask for a couple mil when you've never, ran a company before. But if you have the talent and the capability to do so versus somebody that has no field experience, do you find that is kind of a little piece of gold added to a corporate structure?
Well, let me address raising capital. So my book's called "Gone to Pot," and then as I'm writing this over the last summer, and the valuations kept tanking, the kind of thesis of my book came out, and my subtitle is "Welcome to the Shit Show," because that's really what it is right now. The valuations were way ahead of themselves, but when getting back to raising capital in September of 18. It was very easy to raise capital. And even though many companies were not fully staffed, and the CEOs and the people running these companies didn't understand what investors are going to be looking at, people threw money at us. I mean, we raised a company I was with raised over $100 million in about a month and a half, and I didn't even have financials to give in to them. So
Can I ask a question about that? How many women were in those rooms when that money was raised?
say that again.
How many women were in those rooms? Because I know there's limited women that run VCs. I mean, it's just the way it is. So I'm just curious because, that's something as a woman that I would like to see happen in our society.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple observations. In my particular circumstance, we didn't have any women in the C-suite. We had some women investors. Um, I think, in my experience, the cannabis industry has a fair amount of women in there. Of course, there could be more. I do write in my book that there's a dearth of minorities in the business, even though a lot of people tout that they have, uh, you know, they do value minorities in the business, but very, very few minorities in the business. There's a lot more women than there are minorities, I would say.
But not in the C-suite, not running the money show.
Yeah, not per se. I mean, I know a lot of very talented women in the in investment banking of these firms, um, but not too many in the firms themselves. There's room for more.
Yeah. Hopefully that's, the thing about the cannabis industry is it is the first industry set where women will be paid equally and should be already. But what I've come to find is if you're not in a showmanship position in cannabis, from marketing to sales, obviously investors, that's just different. But if you're in the actual industry itself, as the function, women are, still the showmanship aspect. They don't run the companies enough. But in the black market arena of cannabis, men grew, they stayed home. Women, there wasn't a lot of women growers, even very limited women growers, right? So the females were the ones actually running the businesses. So for there not to be enough women between the investor and the grower, basically, I feel is very underestimated in our industry at this time.
Yeah, I'd say also. I mean, it's unfortunately, I think it's very sexist. I know in some of the companies I've been associated with, there's been sexual harassment lawsuits. There have been a popular position for women is to be the salesperson for a wholesaler, for a grower, because they could go run out and, quote unquote, look pretty, and the buyers are typically men. And I know that women are put in that position purposefully for that, and that's sexist, if you ask me.
So your book, Gone to Pot, what stories are there in there that you would like to share with the audience that you think are the most intriguing that we would want to know?
Wow, I don't even know where to begin with that. Let me start out with the foreword. Everyone looks for a person to write the foreword for their book. And I was fortunate enough to have a guy by the name of Bill Snow write the foreword for Gone to Pot. Bill is an investment banker, and he actually wrote the book Mergers and Acquisitions for Dummies, the For Dummies series. And I didn't tell him what to write. He read my book. He said, sure, I'll do it. He read my book, and he wrote, I think the best writing in the book is the foreword. So he tells a story about his dad was the CFO of several companies, and he'd come home and tell, at the dinner table, tell Bill, he'll say, hey, another caravan of assholes is coming through town on Wall Street. And basically, it really sets the table for the book. We've seen this movie before, whether it's the internet bubble, the Bitcoin bubble, a lot of different bubbles that we've all seen. And the latest iteration is now the cannabis bubble, and the bubble's popped. And he ends his forward by saying, we've seen this story before, we've seen it, we'll see it again, but will we learn? And it's so telling, will we learn? When I was in the internet era, I was with a company, salaries were inflated, rents were inflated, titles were inflated. And, I'd be driving home thinking, wow, what do we know that everybody else doesn't know? Well, the point is, we didn't know, you know, I'm a classically trained MBA from a good school. And I let my guard down in the internet days. And I said, I'm never doing that again. And it came pretty close to let my guard down here in cannabis. But, the math has to work. When companies are out buying companies for 5 or 6 times revenue, um, the math just doesn't work. The young kids, and I call them kids, I'm 60 years old. The guys that own a lot of these companies are 30s and 40 years old. They haven't lived through a lot of what I've seen before. And it was just inevitable that this cannabis bubble burst. But in my book, I tell over 30 stories. I talk about company A through company Z. I ran out of letters. There's just a lot of stories. I talk about stories about a meeting where somebody was going to get murdered. A cannabis CEO was pretty close to getting murdered. I tell stories uh, about deals that were struck where they overpaid for an acquisition by $30 million or 50%. And then when that was brought to their attention and they had to renegotiate, or, they had to have a dinner with the guy and kind of say, oops, we made a mistake. I need to change the purchase price. They left the purchase price alone. So who loses in that scenario? The shareholders. The cannabis industry is the intersection of greed and inexperience. And most of my stories tell about how the shareholders end up taking it in the shorts. There's not transparency. You have a lot of these guys in the C-suites that were pretty successful running privately held companies, but they can't make that transition to a publicly held company or a company with a lot of shareholders. I mean, there's such a thing as fiduciary responsibility, and that's missing in the cannabis industry. They're in it for themselves. They're greedy. They make mistakes. They don't share with the shareholders. They screw the shareholders in a lot of respects, and they waste a lot of the shareholders' money. So again, I tell about 30 stories in my book, and I think I've got a sense of humor about it, and hopefully the investors out there will laugh more than they cry when they read this book.
I am not surprised when I saw your book published, because I had written my article about the hemp crash of 2019 in August. And then, the crash started happening everybody really kind of saw things for what they were, I believe, over Christmas time leading into the new year, and then I saw that your book was published and I felt, wow, okay, yay, okay. I somebody else is on my island too.
Yeah, and it's funny, I don't care if I make friends or don't make friends anymore, but I'll say that probably 80% of the feedback I'm getting from people that are reading my book is like, yep, you nailed it. You're telling the story. I've seen all this at my company. I didn't know it was not normal. I didn't know it was not right. I've seen the greed. I've seen major acquisitions get called off. I've seen people in C-suites where they shouldn't belong. I've seen big deals get struck and then everybody goes out to the Bahamas and parties and all that stuff. I've seen coke in the boardroom, and I've seen drunk people in the office, and that's no way to run a railroad, especially with shareholder money. So 20% of the people, probably those that are still in these C-suites, probably bristle at my stories. But if they want to stare in the mirror and agree or not, I don't care. I don't have any ponies in the race to speak of, even though I may or may not continue working in the cannabis industry.
We're here with Dean Matt discussing his new book, Gone to Pot. We hope you enjoy the cast so far. I've got a couple headlines here and some questions, and maybe we'll analyze some of this. This one is Charlotte's Web faces class action lawsuit for improperly marketing CBD products. So this is a class action from their shareholders. And I do have a question with this because there's quite a few shareholder class actions. I believe there's going to be more. Another one just popped up with who was it? It was Ianthus. who is a subsidiary for many companies, MPX, which I love. I used to like their dabs, but they did get a little soupy. What do you think about what is that exactly? How does that? What kind of impression does that actually leave on a company going forward? Or is getting something from is getting sued just part of what happens?
Well, it doesn't have to happen. Um, a lot of these companies don't have what's called directors and officers insurance. And I write about that in the book. When a lot of the companies were going public in 2018, like GTI and those companies, they were able to afford directors and officers insurance. Of course, the insurance markets vet these companies very well. They look at the tone at the top. They get to know. You just don't fill out an application and to get insurance. You've got to have an interview with the insurance company. They got to know, have you ever been sued before? Have you ever run a company before? Have you ever declared bankruptcy before? On and on and on.
I have a
And
question with that. So, but these CEOs that are, there's CEOs departing their positions in some of these top companies that got their startup and everything because of those people. Now, a lot of those people are departing. So where does that leave the company with all those insurances?
well, the insurance is typically good for a year, and then they have to re-up. So hopefully, if when bad actors are moving out of the business, the insurance company kind of understands that and would be ready to kind of re-up. But what's happened in late 18, there were a lot of lawsuits because people figured out that these CEOs and C-suite executives in these cannabis companies really didn't have the chops to run the company. They ran these companies as they did a privately held company. They hid stuff and they did stuff below board and they didn't disclose things. So a lot of the insurance companies left the market. I think when I was with a big company in the cannabis industry in the fall of 18, there may have been 5 or 6 or 7 insurance companies that did directors and officers insurance. By the end of 18, I think they were down to 3. Why? Because there were payouts and litigation that's happening with these companies. So a lot of people got afraid. It's very expensive. I write about it in my book how expensive it is. Some companies can't even afford it, and that's the difference between going public or selling to some other company. So with respect to Charlotte's Web, I don't want to comment on that. I don't know about that. I will say with respect to CBD though, that is the problem with CBD is, I mean, there's no testing. So you've got to stay on the right side of the law with respect to claims that you make, but the claims are people's opinions. There's not a lot of science behind there. I have a chapter in my book called Snake Oil, and I tell about some CBD products that I was involved with. Buyer beware.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've been on the forefront of that, and that's a message I've been trying to get out to people for years. And when I made my product line, I just used a good genetic that fell under the legal limits of THC and just let the cannabinoids be what they were. It's not a high dose. I've never claimed by dose. This is a natural botanical. This is what's in it, and this is the test result. I dealt with seeing a lot of fraudulent COAs for the last 3 years going on at this point. I want to say 2, at least a good solid 2, where it was just fraud after fraud after fraud, and then you go into the laboratories that are testing that aren't standardized from state to state. That's why Nevada is on the forefront of that, but they still have their problems just like everybody else. But when you look at a lab report, you see the standard number, and that number needs to be the same across the world before we can validate what your dose is.
That's a problem too. Yep, there's a lot of that's a big problem in CBD. There's not a lot of consistency in even the lab results. 2 different labs will come up with 2 different things. In CBD, to be successful, you have to have a good marketing person and a good lawyer. So here's an example I tell in my book. I was working with a sleep products company, and they wanted to say this product will help you sleep better. Well, that's a claim. Their lawyer says it can't do that. Hey, but you could say designed to help you sleep better. And that one word, puts them on the right side of the law. But I know that the FDA is cracking down on that, just like the IRS is cracking down on a lot of these cannabis companies' tax positions.
Speaking of that, I have this other article. So now MedMen's back in the news because the investors want to take the CEO Adam Bierman's home. Because
they were always in the news, unfortunately.
So what do you think about this company? I've been saying for years that it's overvaluated. I feel like, they don't have what they're saying and everything's just inflated. And I believe that this has always been one stock that I tell people run away from since before it was public.
So there's a lot of public information about MedMen. I've never met Adam or Andrew. I've got a lot of followers on LinkedIn. I must have 100 people from MedMen. Some of them still work there. Some of them have been fired or laid off. And if you dial back to 2018, these guys were golden. These guys were rock stars. Literally, they were in Rolling Stone magazine. I tell a couple quotes from the Rolling Stone magazine article in my book, and people follow them. People wanted to believe. Investors wanted to believe, but these are kids. They haven't worked in a corporate America before. They've worked for themselves, and so they pumped up their image. They looked like they knew what they were talking about. They got a nice store. But they don't know anything about math, valuation, how companies are valued. But what did they care? People were throwing money at them, so good for them. So people threw all this money at them. What they said was golden. And then, I say in my book, if you want a good laugh, go back to some of those articles that they were quoted in 2018 and early 2019 and compare that to today. The bloom came off the rose for MedMen in November of 19 when they had a press release. Obviously, their shareholders were upset. They went through a few CFOs. CFOs have sued them, and the results sucked. So in November 2019, as I tell in my book, they have this press release. Oh, we're going to get serious about EBITDA. And I'm thinking to myself, EBITDA, of course. Cash flow's where it's at, guys. Not executing a land grab strategy where you're going to run out of cash. And again, they never did the math before. I write in my book that their mea culpa in their press release is kind of like a guy who gets a DUI, goes home to his wife and says, hey, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. I won't drink and drive. I'll come home after work, blah, blah. And a month later, they're back at it. So in my book, even before the ink was dry, I predicted that for MedMen to make any forward progress at all, the kids have to go. And while my book was in editing in January or February, they kind of cleaned house at MedMen. I think I've been in touch now with their chairman. I've been in touch with a lot of the chairmen of several of these public companies because they have interest in my book and they like my insights. And I said, you guys got a tough job ahead of you. I know you guys are, especially MedMen, they got a real tough job ahead of you. To your point specifically, that came out last week that the deeds have not been turned over for the collateral on the loans. I read that. I just happened to look up these guys' houses, and they're living large. I mean, Adam is living in a $5 million house, and I thought that was big. And the other two guys are living in $10 million houses. So, again, it's not their money; it's shareholder money. There's been revalued options at Harvest. MedMen, I think, had to give up a lot of their options. It's just monopoly money, as I write about in my book as well. It's just the math doesn't work, and the investors who should know better, these big venture funds and investment banks, they let their guard down as well.
Well, because they're running around smoking pot with the cool kids. That's the take I got on him. I met him and when they were in Nevada, I used to throw private parties at my house. And I had, DJ Short there for one event. He seated a lot of companies. I did another dinner party where I was doing stuff with an organization for legalization, and he came there with his gold watch and his cool ways. And I go with vibe. I don't need to analyze a company. And the fact that he didn't shake my hand personally and say, "Hi, thanks for having me to your house," I knew right then and there this was somebody I never would want to do business with. It was in the news recently that there is now a ban on recreational sales in Massachusetts. How does that, you know, how does that with the companies there, with their valuations and investors and all of that?
Yeah, so I'll make a caveat here. There's a great book. Obviously, there's a great figure in the industry, Steve D'Angelo. I'm no Steve D'Angelo. Um, I even say in my book, if you want books about whether marijuana should be legal or not, go see his book. He's a legend. I'm not. I'm just a guy with an opinion that's been in the industry for a couple of years now. It seems that every time there's some good news about some recreation, or during the coronavirus, the first 2 weeks pot sales are up, everyone's rah rah rah. I don't have any ponies in the race. I could care less. What's funny though in Massachusetts is that they're different than the other states. Most of the other states have said recreation is an essential business, where in Massachusetts they said that it's not. I really don't have an opinion. I guess if I own a business, obviously you'd want to see recreational be sold as well. But I do kind of say in the book, everyone starts out for the most part with a medical state, right? And everyone is so careful how they call their customers patients and all that. It's a big facade. It's a facade at the state level too, because they just want to get the foot in the door and then open it wide open for recreation and start raking in the tax revenue. So I kind of call out the state of Illinois. I'm not kind to them in my book, because I live here, and because the state of Illinois has a lot of problems. I'm not kind to MedMen in my book. I'm really not kind to kind of the state of where the industry's at right now, because we're getting what we deserved. I mean, if we have boards of directors that have no teeth, that give hall passes to inept management, they got the wrong management in there in the first place, and they're rubber stamped, then there's no oversight. And again, during the natural maturation process of industries, startup industries like this is, and some I've been involved with in the past, it's just a matter of time until the ship is righted and experience gets in there and is able to run these multi-state operations. I kind of think that for the next year or two, the valuations are going to remain depressed because they just got so far over their skis. Long term, I think the cannabis industry is going to be a great investment. It's going to have a lot of people. It's already got a quarter million people employed in it. But it's going to take a little time to correct the sins of the past.
In your experience, how many of these companies that you've been able to analyze do you feel has adequate investment into the research and development of medicines?
I would say none of them do. Now, this is, I'm not very close to this at all, so this is kind of a 30,000 foot opinion. I'd say none of them do, but almost all of them think they do. There's one scientist that I worked with in the industry that I have a high regard for, and I think she knows what she's talking about, and she tells it like it is. But in my discussions with her, there's just not enough science in the cannabis space. You have to have studies and not folklore. You have to have data and not stories, not anecdotal stories. And I think too many bud tenders that are out there oh, take this one does this and this one does this, and there's no proof of any of that. So I think the from what I hear, I think the plant has a lot of potential, but it's anecdotal right now.
Thank you so much, Dean Matt, for doing this with me and having this chat interview. I guess we'll call it now in the new. I want to start calling it the Corona Cleanse going forward with this pandemic that we're dealing with, because I feel as though there's a cleanse that has occurred, and along with the cleanse that the cannabis industry is feeling. And hopefully when we come out of it, there's a lot of things happening that can assist with cannabis. What would you like to leave our audience with as far as information that they might need, or what would you like to share with them?
Well, again, it's a wild west industry. It's a young industry. Unfortunately, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, but it will get better. Buyer beware when you make an investment, either in a public company or a private company. There's going to be a lot of write-downs yet to come. There's massive layoffs as predicted in my book, and there's probably going to be more to come until these companies are right-sized. I'd keep your powder dry uh, and not invest in marijuana stocks at this time, but maybe in a year or so, check in again and let's see how it goes. Here's the book, Gone to Pot. I've never written a book before. I had a fun time doing it, and it's not only a book about cannabis. It's a good business book. If I could be so shameful and plug it. So it's the good read. It's very entertaining. There's a lot of humor in there. Again, hopefully you'll laugh more than you'll cry, but you'll learn something in this book. And I think if you're in the industry or interested in the industry or invested in the industry, go get this book. You can get it at Amazon.
Go get Gone to Pot, because the cannabis industry has gone to pot. Hope everyone out there is doing well. Stay safe, stay sane. Bye.